On this episode of Search with Candour, I am talking with Maria Scheibengraf all about how SEO and translation need to be working together to really get it right in international markets. It's not just as simple as directly translating your keywords and queries and just changing your website copy. There is a lot more important things that go into the combination of SEO and translation. Really, you need to be thinking about SEO and localization. And that's the big difference I'm talking about with Maria on this episode of Search with Candour. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers-Ward, and this week we're talking all about translations and SEO and why they need to work a bit more closely together, and you might need someone who can do both, because I've got Maria Scheibengraf on the show this week talking all about that very subject and how so many companies, so many agencies get this wrong. It's a controversial topic for a lot of people. I think a lot of people just want to kind of click a button and get their translation done through plugins. But as Maria and I will talk about in this episode, it's a lot more complicated than that, and a lot more things go into the actual translation of things and how they work for search terms in different languages. You can't just directly translate most things. You actually need to get someone in who knows what they're talking about and speaks the language to do the SEO and the translation side of things. All that and more coming up on this week's episode after a word from our sponsors. Search with Candour is sponsored by SE Ranking. SE Ranking has been a trusted name in SEO for over 10 years, since 2013, and SE Ranking has evolved from a rank tracking tool into a comprehensive SEO ecosystem. And they have recently gone through a brand evolution, updating their visual identity to better represent their commitment to innovation, user-friendly interfaces, and cutting-edge technologies. With this evolution, SE Ranking bridges the gap between SEO and innovation. They want to empower people by equipping SEO professionals and businesses with intuitive, innovative solutions and precise data to make informed business decisions. SE Ranking try to make things more easy to navigate. With clean UIs, customizable dashboards, and a responsive customer service, you can get easy access to the SEO data that's important to you and your business. SE Ranking offers a suite of machine learning and AI-powered tools and features designed to enhance your SEO strategies for businesses of any size. I know I talked about this a little while ago, but SE Ranking have launched their AI Overviews tracking feature. It's a brand new tool that allows you to track AI search engine snippets and gain insights into competitors' performance in AI-generated search results. And they've evolved their content marketing as well. AI-powered content creation and optimization tools that help users develop SEO-optimized content faster than ever before and more efficiently as well. So come and experience the SE Ranking evolution. Get 15% off any annual subscription plan on your first order by using the code BRANDEVOLUTION at checkout. This promotion is valid all the way through September 2024, so you only have limited time to go and check that out. Like I said, use the links in the show notes or the video description down below. Use the code BRANDEVOLUTION. You'll get 15% off and enjoy your first year of SE Ranking and all of their amazing features and brand new tools. Optmyzr is the modern PPC management software that is built by PPC people for PPC people. Optmyzr contains everything you need to create, optimize, and automate high-performing paid campaigns across multiple platforms. As I just mentioned, we're going across platforms, and I think this is one of the best time-saving options and features when it comes to Optmyzr. If you are advertising across multiple platforms, including Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, then you need to be using these cross-platform tools. You can create reports, you can create shareable dashboards, you can share budgets and alerts across all of these platforms. If you are individually managing each of these things, you could save yourself a lot of time by using Optmyzr's cross-platform tools. For monitoring, the alerts let you know when budgets have been exhausted or KPIs have been reached or missed. And when it comes to the rule engine, this allows you to set up custom rules to automate so many time-consuming and manual tasks that are part of your paid campaigns. You can easily automate rules. Basically, if you can write your strategy or tactic down, you can automate it. It's that simple. This can be especially helpful in things like e-commerce when it comes to stopping overspending of a particular ad. This is something I know from personal experience. I have had an ad that has overspent, and if I had used Optmyzr, that would have saved my budget and saved my campaign in that instance, and I wish I'd used Optmyzr at the time. You can also adjust bids and choose which products or ads are showing based on things like the weather and pretty much anything else you can put into a spreadsheet. It is fully customizable and automated, so you can choose when ads start and which products are showing depending on the time of year, depending on the weather, and so many other factors. It's all automated and makes the process so much easier. To sum it up, Optmyzr is the award-winning all-in-one PPC toolkit that makes managing paid search easier, faster, and less prone to error. It puts you back in the control of your campaigns by allowing you to create and deploy your own automations across multiple ad platforms. You can start your 14-day free trial by going to optmyzr.com. That's optmyzr.com. You can also click the link in the show notes. And if you want to see Optmyzr in action, you can book a personalized demo with one of Optmyzr's experts by clicking the link in the show notes as well. So you can get a 14-day trial or book a demo at no cost to you. Like I said, go and click the link in the show notes or the video description down below. And a huge thank you to Optmyzr for sponsoring Search with Candour. My guest for this week is an award-winning and certified translator and a professional writer across marketing, IT, and SEO. She's also the operations manager at Crisol Translation Services, a company specializing in marketing, translation, and SEO localization, as well as an experienced public speaker. Welcome to the show, Maria Scheibengraf.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much for coming on. I know you and I have been chatting online for a little while now, and it's really, really nice to finally have a topic that I think we've kind of touched on a little bit in the past. I know we'll give credits to a few people earlier on, but particularly want to mention Sarah Presh, who kind of talked about the cultural impact of kind of how we underestimate essentially the cultural impact and changes and how language can affect SEO. And our topic for this week is exactly talking about that, because we're going to talk about why translation and SEO should work together more closely, and why translators should have SEO skills and SEOs should have translation skills, and you need to kind of do them all together at the same time, right? That's an important part of it. And I think it's something, me as an SEO who is not a translator, I very much take that for granted. And I think that's something a lot of us in the industry take for granted is, oh, there's a plugin that will translate that. You can just put it through Google Translate or ChatGPT or whatever. But I think from your experience, Maria, you have the unique experience of both sides of it, right? So I guess the opening question is, why is this topic so important to you, and why is it important to the industry as a whole as well?
Right. So I think that there isn't much information about SEO translation as a discipline to begin with. Just to start with, SEO translation is actually a misnomer, because we're not talking about just translating words or the content on the page and just hoping for long-term success and maximum benefits. There's so much more when you want to have SEO success in a different market to your own market. SEO translation should actually be called, and is actually being called more and more, SEO localization, and the concept of making things feel local to your target audience involves so many skills that only a properly trained linguist can help deliver. But I have seen from experience, I've been doing this for many years, and I'm a linguist myself, so I translate from English into Spanish, and I specialize in marketing and SEO, but I also coordinate teams who work into other languages and with other language pairs. And what I have seen is that there aren't enough properly trained linguists who will apply everything that you need to know about SEO for multilingual content to be effective and successful. And equally on the SEO side, like you said, translation and all the cultural knowledge that a linguist can bring to the table is taken for granted, especially nowadays in the age of artificial intelligence. So I think it's super important to raise awareness that the best results come from when you combine both skill sets, and I have brought some ideas as to how to make that happen in practice when a marketing manager or a localization manager or someone at a big company is looking to put together a proper team for international SEO success.
Yeah, I think that's like you said, the taking for granted thing. I think that's totally true for so many of us when you think about the kind of things we talk, because we talk about keywords and the way people search and all that kind of stuff so often in SEO, but just translating one word to its exact equivalent in another language just isn't how people search in other languages and other cultures, right? And I think you're totally right thinking about how the kind of workflow and the process of this works. Let's kind of dig into that a bit, because I think that's really fascinating how we start with, like I said, the keywords and all that kind of stuff in SEO. What should be the kind of thought process for agencies combining the two and working those two together? What's the kind of, I guess, the initial flaws that you've seen in your experience?
Well, I do see a flawed workflow, and this is the time to mention Sarah Presh again. Credit her as well for some of these insights, because she and I have very frequent discussions on this topic, and also Rose Newell, she's another colleague that I have brainstormed about this a lot. We all agree. Luckily, there's a few of us in the industry that have spotted this problem and are trying to raise awareness about it. But the main problem is that translation agencies have picked up on this demand for SEO translation services, multilingual SEO. So they're adding it to their offer. They're doing it wrong from the very beginning. They are pushing multilingual SEO and SEO translation into the traditional translation workflow, and that just doesn't work. So I've realized that what they normally do, the steps that they normally follow, leads to subpar results and disappointed customers and metrics that don't add up, and lack of actual and adequate consultancy. So there's no strategy. The client briefing step is flawed. Keyword research is treated as merely a list of keywords that can be transferred quite literally onto another language without taking cultural aspects into consideration. They use that translated list of keywords to just insert the target language keywords into a regular translation without any consideration for whether the structure of the content needs to be changed, or a certain aspect of it needs to be addressed from a different angle, or maybe a whole piece of content is completely irrelevant altogether in the target language and the target culture. SEO optimization is then normally in these flawed workflows assigned to an SEO specialist who has no contact or no collaboration whatsoever with the linguistic team. So there's friction, there's unnecessary back and forth, there's undoing of the other team's hard work by both parties, and the end result, the actual product, is of terrible quality. And you may have great linguists working on it, great SEOs working on it, and the product is just really bad because of how the workflow has been structured, and that inadequate workflow stems from these agencies basically not knowing what they're doing and pretending that, and that annoys me. So that's another reason why I love so much.
Yeah, I think that's totally true, where a lot of the kind of, even outside translation bit in like marketing, but I think it's also true for, you're seeing more demand for digital marketing stuff and SEO stuff, and companies will just kind of add SEO as an extra little service of like, oh, we'll do that at the end, that's fine, don't worry about it. Like that's easy, we'll just do that, ignoring the fact that it's an entire separate industry with entire separate skills and specialists, and exactly as you're saying there. I think it's really interesting when you come around to thinking about the like you said, the cultural side of things, the localization side of things. I first heard of the phrase localization, I think I must have been pretty young, when I was first playing video games that were made in Japanese, and then obviously localized into English. And there is always these funny little quirks and silly little dialogue things that didn't quite make sense to me when I was really young. It's like, oh, why did they say it like that? Or how come that works? And that was kind of my introduction to directly translating something doesn't always work in the same context. There'll be certain phrases, certain idioms, certain cultural terms of use of the words and things like that, where when you translate it from one word to another, it doesn't quite work from language to language. And I think it's really interesting when we think about how people are searching and the skills that we use as SEOs, search intent, keywords, all that kind of stuff, how that search intent can change so dramatically in the way those words are used from language to language, right? Like, I think the example that Sarah used when we talked about it on the show a few months ago, and the one I've told the story of many times, it was not even a word, it was a logo. I think it was the Renault logo that's the little diamond shape like that. And because that diamond shape refers to vaginas in another culture, they were called like the vagina car. Or like, oh, well, they're just a tiny little logo that's just a shape that nobody, needed to worry about at the time, but just a tiny little thing like that. Suddenly that becomes culturally significant when you translate it. And that's without even using words. That's just a cultural difference of this shape has a different thing.
Localization entails so much more than language.
Exactly,
especially when you're dealing with digital content and when you've got a website, everything from the font you use and the size of it, and how you lay out the content. In some cultures, they prefer very cluttered user interfaces with lots of information, and then on this side of the world, we tend to prefer more blank space and a more minimalist approach to design. Everything counts towards making the user feel comfortable, which is such an important step towards getting them to buy from you. If you're selling women's clothing and you're trying to sell them in a country where women dress very modestly, what sort of terms are they going to be using to find that clothing? They're not going to be using the term micro bikini. Can I show you that? So you can't just be translating it from English. It's not going to work. It's just not going to work. You need to try and find out what they are using to search for that. And then you can't just insert whatever equivalent term you've found into the existing literal translation of the English text, because it's not going to make any sense. So you might need to restructure it or rewrite it or get rid of some bits. And that's where SEO localization comes into play. And you do need a linguist who knows their culture inside out, who's able to advise, but also who's able to provide complete and accurate advice that will not undo any SEO efforts. And that's why you need trained linguists.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where that crossover is so important, right? When you get the understanding of both sides, exactly as you guys do over at Chrysol, there's that element of having the skills from both sides and making them work together rather than them clashing or butting heads against each other. Like, oh, this is the best SEO idea, but this is the best localization idea. And actually they don't work together. Bringing it all together, I think, is where a lot of us make mistakes in multilingual SEO and international SEO. And again, to use Japan as an example, so to give you some context, Maria, and I've mentioned it a couple of times on the show before, I used to work at a language school before working in agencies, and that was like my first job in digital marketing and things like that. So I was dealing with people from around the world. We had loads of customers from the Middle East, from Asia, from all parts of the world. And it was mine and my colleague's job to just rebuild our website. I was like, okay, I've never built a website before. I'm 22, like over 10 years ago at this point. I was like, okay, I'm just going to hope for the best. My boss was Japanese, and she had a very clear idea of what a website should look like. And using the exact example you were saying there, like, oh, we want all of the text in one long block and don't interrupt it with images or formatting, or don't worry about that side of things. And there's a whole from a design perspective as well, like you're saying, things like UX and the layout of pages comes into this as well. It's not just the words, it's not just the way we present stuff, but the formatting, the menus, the navigation, all that kind of stuff is important. And we found that my boss, who was then in her 60s and Japanese, had a completely different idea of what a website should look like compared to what we were trying to build on WordPress, just being like, well, this should be this thing and they should find the prices here and stuff. Like, no, it should be this thing. And there's a whole different kind of philosophy around the web design in Japan and how those sites work. And that, like you said, completely translates to then selling something in the Middle East or selling something even from English-speaking countries to other English-speaking countries. Like Australians and Americans say something different to me as a British person, and you still need to understand that even within the same language, let alone when you're changing the language and becoming an even wider kind of discussion, right?
Something I learned recently, this wonderful book called The Culture Map. I don't know if you've read it. And it mentions, it touches on how different cultures have different codes when it comes to communicating. And in the US, or the US culture is a high context culture. They need everything very explicit in communication for it to be successful. In the UK, the preferred form of communication is very low context. So there's lots of puns and reading between the lines and sarcasm. And that's why even the sense of humor between both cultures, which speak technically the same language, even if it's a different variety of it, there are clashes. They don't. How many times have you tried to speak to someone from the US and struggled with getting your joke across, or they just little things like that? And when it comes to marketing and SEO content, you want to be understood. I mean, that's the first thing that you should be trying to achieve. So you need the cultural code. You need to be very well versed in how the target audience communicate, and that goes so much more beyond translating words one by one or phrase by phrase.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier about making the user feel comfortable. I think that's such an important part of, like, for example, when I go onto a site that is not, like you said, made by Americans, for example. Let's harp on the Americans. Sorry, American listeners and viewers. We're going to use you as an example. My humor, because I am a very British, very, like you said, dry humor, sarcasm, all that kind of stuff, often does not work for the US. And I'll find myself trying to enjoy like a US sitcom, for example. Take the difference between like the British office and the US office being the perfect example of, like, the British one is one season. It is very like kind of dour and dry and sarcastic and all that kind of thing. And then the US office is 15 seasons and big and bombastic and, like you said, very high context. All jokes are like quite in your face and a lot of the British stuff. And I think that's why the first season of the US office, I know so many people say, don't watch that. Don't watch it, because it's almost like they try to directly translate it into the US. Like, yeah, that doesn't quite work. Once they actually settle into it being more culturally relevant for the US audience in the later seasons, it becomes its own thing. It becomes its own show and becomes incredibly successful. And as weird as it is to compare The Office to SEO, I think that's still like relevant in that topic, right? You can take the exact same content that worked and is hugely successful. You're getting loads of clicks, you're getting loads of conversions, you're making loads of money, selling loads of products, whatever it is, and translate that over, and in theory you do a good job, all the, like, it's grammatically correct and it all works and all that kind of stuff. But because of the cultural differences, like you said, you may not use the exact same word that is not a direct translation for that same product. The micro bikini example you gave earlier, I think, is a really good example of that. Whereas you would rephrase that and kind of shift the idea to be more culturally relevant to the user, right? And I think something you mentioned in our show notes that I think I had totally ignored and taken for granted as well is the technical SEO side of things as well, right? I think that's because we're so often, again, talking about the words, and like I said, I have been totally guilty of this, and I think a lot of the listeners will be as well, where it's that element of, oh, translation, localization means words. But actually, when it comes to the formatting and the actual way the website works and, you know, on a fundamental foundational level, that changes from culture to culture as well, right?
Yeah, and translation agencies do not tend to include technical SEO as part of the package. So who's handling it? And is that anywhere, has that been discussed with the client? Is there a strategy in place? Who's going to own technical SEO? Because are you going to be using a subdirectory for each target market, or a country code top level domain, or what's the internet connection like in the target market? How quickly do pages load? What sort of devices does the population have access to? Are you going to use a content delivery network to speed up the site because you may have all the best content and have done everything really well, but the page is not loading, so it's working against you? And all of that ties back to what I mentioned before, the flawed workflow that I can see in traditional agencies, offers and poor executions of international SEO, where strategy is missing. There is no strategy, and that means technical SEO is overlooked. Like I said, there's no investment in proper tools to execute SEO localization, because you need proper tools. There's an oversimplification, this assumption that what will work, the domestic market will carry over to target markets and it will just be fine. Decisions aren't informed by data. No one's done any actual research. How about competitor research? Like, you're not dealing with the same stuff at home as you are abroad. So where are you standing? Where are the gaps? And all of that means that then, a few months down the line, the client comes back and say, look, we're not performing as well in Germany as we are in England. What's going on? The translation is really bad, isn't it? And probably the translation is absolutely flawless, perfect. There's not a single typo in there. But because it's just been executed so poorly in the big scheme of things, then the translators are blamed. The agency doesn't own up to its own lack of expertise and what's that resulted in. And the client ends up not believing in SEO localization as something that can bring them revenue. So everyone loses. And all we all need to learn is that SEO translation is a magnificent tool to bring more revenue to companies trying to operate internationally, but it has to be executed properly with an adequate workflow in place by people who know how to do it.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point when it comes to, like you said, thinking outside of even what people are searching for, how they search, how they interact with the internet, what devices are they using. I think is something most people would never think of in a million years, right? You would just assume that everyone has a good, I'm scoring well on Lighthouse or Core Web Vital Tester or whatever you're using, whatever tool you use to test that kind of stuff. But it being relevant to a lesser developed country that has far less infrastructure for the internet, so really you should be testing things like 2G or 3G rather than a full 5G connection, or even like broadband and high speed and fiber and all that kind of stuff. I think that's something a lot of us really kind of forget about, how much that will change from one country to the next. And as somebody who has lived, again, this is a weird example, I grew up in the countryside here in England with no phone signal, barely any internet, all that kind of stuff. And even as simple as, like I said, being in the same country and having different access. Granted, this was when I was a child, like 30 years ago, but I think it's still relevant now when you go from country to country and device to device. What are the mobile speeds? Is there an infrastructure for wireless internet? Is it all mobile based? Like, I know, again, using Japan as an example, because that's where I traveled to a few years ago as part of work and things like that. A lot of people have the like portable Wi-Fi hubs, essentially looks like a little battery pack essentially in your pocket. And loads of tourists have these kind of things. So you're then able to essentially kind of hop on to the local networks and connect that way, rather than waiting for your roaming data to connect and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was so interesting using the same phone as I had used in the UK, using the same laptop I'd used in the UK, and then connecting it to this and seeing how differently, exactly as you're saying there, Maria, like how quickly does this website load? Oh, I loaded up our own website. This was mid-presentation, which I should have thought about, but I was young and naive. I was presenting to some Japanese colleagues, and I loaded up our website that we had just built, and I was like, this is very slow. I was not prepared for how slow this is going to be, and I should have really thought about that. Obviously, if we had had this conversation 10 years ago, that would have helped a lot, but but I was naive in that sense, and I think that's something you really need to think about when it comes to how people navigate around the site as well, right?
Yeah, that's another origin of because I was trying to think, right, where's the root of this problem? And I found too many roots. So one of them is the workflow bit that I just mentioned. SEO treated as an afterthought, something that you could just add on at the end or before or in the middle. But also, this is super important. Companies who are operating internationally don't tend to have the internal expertise to guide the localization process. So they don't tend to have, and I'm talking about mid-sized companies here, because obviously, big corporate giants do tend to have a localization department, but mid-sized companies or even smaller ones don't usually have a localization department in-house with someone who understands all of these things. So what they do is they ask the translation agency that they've chosen to help them with SEO localization to advise them. And they ask for their guidance. And if the translation agency, like I said before, is not an expert in the field, thus is not hiring the right people for the job, the advice they are providing is faulty. And they also don't have an internal SEO strategist as part of the team. So you've got two very separate teams, the client on one side and the agency on the other side, without the internal expertise that would help them work collaboratively with the other party. And that results in a very disjointed approach, if you want. The client thinks that SEO translation is just a linguistic task. We've done all the hard work here in terms of SEO. The English market SEO is done, just now get it translated, and the agency is saying, here's the translation. If you want to fix any of the SEO, just give us a list of keywords. We'll localize them, we'll insert them, and that's SEO done for you. And then nobody knows any better, because there's nobody on the other end saying, actually, this isn't going to work. So that's another root. There's no integrated approach. It's quite disjointed. And even if the agency, because I have seen agencies that understand the problem and that they are trying to offer the right service and they know what they should be doing, they go out there and they cannot find enough linguists who are properly trained in SEO beyond multilingual keyword research. Yes, they can use common SEO tools to find keywords, but that's all they can do. They are unable to advise on anything beyond what they are seeing on the text. And that agency then needs to either find an SEO to bring into the team, but that SEO needs to be bilingual or multilingual or understand both of the languages involved, because they need to be able to spot cultural differences, at least to be able to agree with the linguist's feedback and avoid any friction. So the lack of resources in the industry is a massive problem as well. You need dual-wielding professionals, and this is the main argument in my talk here. You need a linguist who's also an SEO, and if you can't find one, you need to bring in an SEO who speaks both languages. So that's my main point.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, like you said, to kind of like QA and proofread both sides and understand both sides, right? And this was something I was having a conversation with Natalia Witschik a few months ago now when she was here visiting and talking at Search Norwich. And Natalia, being a native Polish speaker living in Spain who speaks Spanish and also speaks English and does talks in both Spanish and English, and like she had this amazing talk about like tools to use for international SEO, and even something as simple as when you're, like you said, looking and QAing stuff and trying to understand why this thing wasn't working. Natalia said, always use a VPN, because you can search as much as you want for, a French competitor or a German speaking competitor or whatever it is. but search engines will give you different results based on your location. I think you're totally right where it comes around to thinking about how you can then proofread that and understand that in QA as a multilingual SEO coming in and understanding, okay, I've seen the translation side of things, I've seen the SEO side of things, how can they work together? Using something like a VPN to research what other people are doing in the space, what competitors are doing. Are they doing, you can use good examples and bad examples, like, oh, we saw this competitor, they don't know what they're doing, this is badly localized and doesn't work. Or this guy's, oh, they seem to actually know what they're talking about, this is culturally relevant and properly translated and localized. And for me, that was such a small little thing of like, oh yeah, you could just assume you just go to google.fr or google.de or whatever. It's like, yeah, and then I'll just search from there. But actually your location matters, and using something I think a lot of people think of to access new things on Netflix or protect your data when you're in an airport or whatever it is, actually can be really, really useful and a powerful tool for doing international SEO and understanding different markets from different sides of things. And if you speak the language that you're then researching, like you said, you then have the data to back it up. You can then actually have that competitor data, have that keyword research, have even the technical side of things and say, yeah, this website is in theory fantastic, but it loads terribly when I'm trying to check it on this device or do this thing. Little things like that where you can kind of shift your perspective a little bit, I think, and like you said, understand it from both sides. I think it's hugely important, and something a lot of people will get in an SEO to come and check something or a translator to check something, but multilingual SEOs and people who can do that SEO localization, like you said, are unfortunately few and far between. Thankfully, there's some awesome people like yourself, like Natalia, like Sarah out there that are doing great work, like Rose as well, that are doing fantastic work. But
yeah, those are,
there needs to be more of you.
Yeah.
not to pressure on the industry to learn more languages.
And more awareness. No, but also I do use this opportunity to for any linguist who might be listening to this, if you want to offer SEO translation, SEO localization as a service, or if you are an agency owner and you want to include that as part of your package, you need to go beyond keywords and content, and actually train in the discipline. As you were talking, I was thinking how it's so important and simultaneously so underrated that the client and the agency are able to work collaboratively. So you've got the marketing department at the client agency, at the client company, with an SEO in there, I'm assuming, who's done the English side of things already. And you've got the agency on this side. Well, you need someone on the agency side who can speak the SEO language, which is a language in itself. And be able to have meaningful and productive debates, discussions, conversations, and, strategy meetings with the SEO and the client company. And equally, you need that person on the client side to be able to understand that translation goes beyond language, and it's in those cases, in those scenarios where I've seen the best results come to life, when there's just this fruitful back and forth because both sides have both skill sets. So that's important to motivate people, I guess, to train in, or at least to investigate and to do some more research and to get to learn what's involved in what the other team are doing.
Yeah, I think that's, weirdly enough, that's been a theme for a lot of the episodes this season, I think, is this multidisciplinary, don't just have SEO siloed off as a separate activity. You need to be communicating with the other teams, marketing teams, translation teams, localization teams, whatever it is. You all need to be working together far more collaboratively now, especially with how mature the internet is and with how content has evolved over the last 25 years of the internet being around, and people have been creating SEO content for 25 years at this point. I think we really need to kind of emphasize how important these, what seem like little bits of information, little recommendations, but actually can be a huge difference maker between the work you're doing and the work your competitors are doing. I know we've talked about a lot of things when it comes to why like social media can be important and relevant for content creation. And I think talking about localization in this way ties it all around really nicely and brings that whole thing where we all kind of need to be working together, whether that's technical content creation, coming around and thinking about the actually getting the data and doing the research. I'm always a proponent of data-driven decisions. I have a background in science. I always want as much data as possible. You mentioned high context communication. I'm also that as well. So I'm a weird hybrid, British terrible humour and also high context communication. And give me all the data, give me all the information you can, and I'll go from there, kind of thing. And I think a lot of people underestimate that the power of that data and the power of, like you said, having someone who is multi-skilled and multidisciplinary to then come in and almost whip everyone into shape in the nicest way possible. Be like, okay, I can see what you guys are doing here. I can see the keyword research. I can see the technical expertise, but let's bring that all together and understand how it all collaborates together. So I guess for you, Maria, what is the ideal kind of process of when that multidisciplinary person, that SEO localization expert comes into that process? Should it be from the absolute start when you're thinking about this process, or is there a kind of an ideal point where you need to get involved and everybody needs to start collaborating together?
They should be involved from the get-go, in my opinion.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
Well, it saves everyone time and therefore cost, right? Or you just optimize the workflows as much as possible. There should, in my head, the way I've envisioned things should ideally be, and drawing from experience as well, the ideal workflow starts with a proper international SEO strategy that doesn't oversimplify SEO, but takes every target market as a separate case. Then it goes into proper client briefing, where SEO is integrated into all of the linguistic work rather than just left until the very end or turned into a clumsy insertion of keywords. After everyone's been briefed and everyone knows what role they play in the whole process, keyword research starts, and the person that's best equipped to do good keyword research that will bring, ideal click-through rates and impressions and conversions and all of that is someone who understands the culture. So you need the linguist/SEO, so a linguist who's also an actual SEO doing the keyword research. And yeah, sure, by all means, go for a traditional translation agency. Just make sure they follow this workflow and they hire the right people. So strategy, briefing, keyword research done by the dual-skilled professional. Then you move into the regular translation, editing, proofreading part of the process, which has to be there when you're working with text. But then if the linguist/SEO person is in charge of that, they can simultaneously optimize the content on page rather than then sending the translation to an SEO who will tweak it around and then undo some of the hard work. The same person is doing everything at once. Then you decide what technical SEO adjustments are needed, which you will have already anticipated during the strategy step at the beginning. And then you just have a final QA, make sure that everything is aligned in terms of strategy, linguistic accuracy, layout, keywords, etc. You check all the boxes, you publish. That's a workflow that I have seen work best for my own clients, and also paying attention to what other great companies out there are doing. Because like I said, luckily there are a few translation agencies out there that are doing it right. But the moment you get the workflow down right, and you've got the right people in the team with both skill sets, it's very difficult that you won't get good results.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of that, the power of that element comes into it, right? When you're having, and I think this is true for, when we said this for migrations, for example, you're not changing languages, you're just changing from one CMS to the next or redesigning. Having somebody who is part of that team, who is involved from start to finish, like you said, to drive that strategy, to have that fundamental building block of strategy, to know these are the things we want to change and why we want to change them, and we have, like you said, the data to back that up, to say this is why we're going for this target market, or in the case of a migration, this is why we're moving to this CMS, or changing this redesign, or changing hosting, or whatever it is. The thing I always say with migrations is like SEO should be involved from the very beginning. And like I said, I kind of knew you were going to say that for this process as well, because I think that's generally the case. And like I said, it's kind of been a theme for every episode this season is everyone should be involved in this process. Bring in other team members who aren't necessarily involved in that to have that initial discussion to make sure you're all on the same page. Don't wait until the very end to get the technical team involved and then they realize like, oh, we can't build a menu with those words in it because the way you've translated those words and then localized them, that doesn't fit in our, like, the number of pixels we have available on the menu. It could be something as simple as that. I was like, oh, okay, well, we need to go back 10 steps, back to keyword research. We understand that. How do we change this? And like you said, I think having those moments where you can regroup and understand and everybody's on the same page going through that process together, rather than here is step 1, team 1, step 2, team 2, like everybody working together. Granted, that's sometimes not possible in certain companies, and this is all very like ideal world scenario, right?
Yeah.
And I know this isn't always possible, and budgets and time constraints and all that kind of stuff. But I think you're totally right in having somebody that multi-skilled, multilingual SEO being involved in that process is such an important part to bring the whole thing together, like you said, to drive those conversions, to bring in revenue, to improve those click-through rates. And like you said, and you don't want at the end of the day where 3 months down the line, you've launched your German site and then you realize you're getting no traffic whatsoever. But we did so well with our French language site. Why isn't it working in the German-speaking countries? Like, well, you just kind of translated directly and didn't really think about it. That can be
like the Germans, for example. I work with lots of fintechs, right? Like fintechs are, I would say, our main client at Brazil. The Germans are very particular when it comes to...
I know a lot about Germans as well. It was a big part of my experience in the language industry, like I was saying earlier. My other boss was German.
Yeah, if you're gonna get a German to open their wallet and give you not just their money but their data, you need to be very careful how you're wording that on your website and what reassurances you're giving them that they're protected and they're safe. So the whole angle of what you're writing needs to change to reflect that you get what they're worrying about and you've got their back. And that's so culturally ingrained, and yet it's not very important in other cultures. I'm terrible. I just give my data to anyone. I don't.
You're an accept all cookies kind of person, right? Like...
Yeah, exactly. But it is culturally coded in lots of cases, and the Germans are a very good example. And you were mentioning budget before as well. Well, there's two problems with budget. First problem is, if the client company is not receiving adequate advice from the translation agency, who's not an expert in SEO localization, they won't be assigning enough budget to those efforts. And then what you can do with limited budget is not ideal case scenario, right? But also, when you optimize workflows and when you get it right from the get-go and everyone involved from the beginning, and all of these things ironed out before they become massive issues that then you need to pay lots to fix, well, you're saving that budget as well. So it's really important. My main message would be for anyone who's in the marketing department and thinking of doing SEO localization for the company, get everything in place, the whole structure, the workflow, the advice, the strategy, all of it down from the beginning, and you will be saving so much budget down the line, and the results are going to come in so much faster.
Yeah, I think that saves those like unexpected last minute changes that then cost a load of money and all that kind of stuff. I think that's a brilliant piece of advice for any kind of project, really. If you're planning a project with a budget.
I've seen so many teams, well, not so many, maybe 2 or 3. I remember 2 or 3 clients coming to me saying, right, we want all of these topics like rewritten from scratch in Spanish or in Italian. how much is that going to cost? Well, it's going to, it's content writing, SEO content writing, it's going to cost you this or that much. You don't need to be doing content writing from scratch for this, because you've got tons of content in English that can be partially reused. So you can be saving a lot of money. And it was lack of awareness and lack of information and lack of education that were making them be ready to spend a lot more than they needed to. So a proper SEO / linguist professional will be able to say, right, this can be localized quite literally. Sometimes that can be the case. This translates really well, literally. It's going to work culturally. We localize the keywords and it's fine. That's the cheapest thing that you can do. So if you can do it, do it. This is not going to work at all. You get rid of this content. It's irrelevant in the target market. Write something new around this other thing. And this third bit here, we can partially reuse it and add stuff in and take some stuff out. That you need to be, it's a resource, mix and match, but also saving as much money as you can where you should be saving it.
Yeah, I think reusing resources is such a powerful, excuse me, I think reusing resources is such a powerful part of that process. Well, like you said, rather than starting from scratch, you have so much of that element already in there. And I get that this is also true, again, keep using the example, even if you're not going to a different language, you can repurpose and reuse older content and really make it shine and sing and convert and all that kind of things. I've had a lot of really good experience with going through a content audit with a client and working through that. I was like, actually, this piece has a lot of potential and you could totally work this in a way where you can improve this thing, change this thing, retweak that, add this, and it becomes a whole new, shining example, best performing page on the site kind of example there. And I think it's a really, really good example you're mentioning about how particular Germans can be. And like I said, my other boss was German at the English language school I worked at. And he would always give me examples of the mentality behind money and how that changes. Speaking of budgets and things, if you're trying to sell something to somebody, should you be saying, oh yeah, it's the cheapest, most affordable option? Or should you be saying, this is a really high quality, worth its money kind of thing? And I remember him always saying like, Germans, they want to pay for something that's quality. They want something that will last. Don't say we are the cheapest, we are the least expensive, all those specific words that would probably work quite well in a lot of English speaking languages when you're looking for like we were selling English language courses, so EFL and ETL courses, English as a second language kind of courses, and translating that to actually, no, this should be, we are a high quality, we're offering a high quality service, so we should sell it as that. And then another market would say, actually, no, we're a lot cheaper than a lot of the other companies, so let's focus on that as our unique selling point. And culturally, across different markets and across different languages, it made such a big difference when we were saying, in one language we're saying like, yeah, we're cheap, come and see us. The UK back then, we're much more expensive now, was relatively cheap, and the pound is weak and all that kind of stuff. And then taking that to another culture and saying like, actually, this is a high quality service, these are high quality courses, and you're getting what you're paying for because you're paying for excellent teachers and excellent resources and all that kind of stuff. It's exactly the same product and exactly the same service and the same prices, I hasten to add. We're not upping and changing the prices across different countries. It's just the fact that you word it in a slightly different way and reframe it because of how different cultures talk about money. You mentioned budgets there, Maria, like how people handle those budgets of like, £1,000 in one country translates to something completely different in another country. And it's tiny little things like that. It was kind of my like first little inkling into actually understanding that it's not just, it's an English language course or it's this product or it's this service or whatever. The way you talk about your products and your services and the way you sell them to your customers can massively affect how people react to it.
You need to be evoking, or you need to be stimulating those culturally coded responses. We talked about high context cultures and low context cultures, but then there's another paradigm, if you want, or dimension when it comes to cultural codes, which is how happy a culture is to take a risk. So high risk cultures and low risk cultures. So the way you talk about your product in marketing should also be reflecting that. For example, some Asian cultures are very risk averse. So if you've got a travel company and you're trying to sell something like a travel package, well, then you should be mentioning things such as the ability to book in big groups, everything being pre-booked and very very detailed schedules of what's going to happen and when, because you're selling to people who don't like uncertainty, don't like risk, are not comfortable spending money on things that will make them feel uncomfortable. So, I repeated myself there, but you get the gist. So you need to be very mindful of what they value culturally across different dimensions, and then include that in your messaging. And it might be the same product, like you said, same price point, but you're just approaching and talking about it from a different angle, because they will be searching for your product using terms and ideas and concepts that reflects that. So you need to match them and meet them where they are and how they are searching for it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's such a, like I said, it was a tiny small thing that kind of clicked in my brain a little while ago when I was talking to. So I was, like I said, working for a German boss, a Japanese boss, working with a lot of Spanish speakers in the office as well, and having all their different perspectives kind of come together and say, like, okay, if I was doing this, this is how I would do it. If I was thinking about this is how I would sell it. And like you said, thinking about how to appeal to their cultural norms and their cultural understandings, and if at the end of the day we're marketers that want to evoke emotions and solve the problems for our customers, right? If you're selling a product, ideally it's going to be the product that you have a problem and this product solves for you. You're watching, I don't know, something on Netflix, but you could be watching it in the highest definition possible, so here's a new TV. Or you could be, we mentioned broadband and internet prices. Like, just think about how fast you could be downloading things and streaming if you're using this new broadband service, this new internet service. And that could be hugely relevant for one culture, and then shift it around and think like, okay, at the end of the day, you want to be the emotions of marketing, the absolute fundamentals. Even before we had digital marketing, the internet, and it was all people shouting in the streets, newspapers and things, magazines and things like that. Marketing at the end of the day is about getting a response from your readers, from your audience, from your users. And I think that is still so relevant now, and still kind of underestimated now in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to picturing it, like you said, from different angles for different cultures as well.
I mean, there is quite a lot of awareness that emotional marketing is a thing. I mean, it has been proven that people make their purchase decisions based on emotions and not logic. So if you can evoke an emotion in someone, great. What not many people are aware of is that emotions are culturally coded and culturally based. So your response, your intuitive response to something, the emotion it will trigger, it will not be the same if you're from one culture or versus another. So if you understand what makes someone tick based on where they're from and their circumstances and their context, then you can consciously trigger the emotion that you're after. That's going to lead to a sale.
Yeah, I think there was an example I saw. I don't know if you saw this example. There was a Nike advert about a month or so ago that had the voice of Willem Dafoe, the actor, and it was all about "Am I a bad person?" was the kind of like headline thing. And
I've seen it. Yeah.
It was about sports people like world champions and legendary people like Michael Jordan and LeBron James and all these like incredible, historic, all-time great sports people. They have the drive to make the sacrifices and push themselves harder. And maybe I didn't go to my daughter's 3rd birthday, and maybe I forgot this thing, or, I lost some friends along the way, but I'm a world champion. And I just thought, again, this is me being very British and coming from my perspective, like, this seems very mean, and I'm not happy about it. Like, this seems like a very cutthroat. Maybe I'm a bit too, cuddly and friendly and all that kind of stuff. But it came off as very American to me, which is, like you were saying earlier, a culture like driven by a lot of drive and a lot of passion, and we want to be big and loud and American and all this kind of stuff, compared to the Brits, where we're far more subdued and sarcastic and more self-deprecating and things like that. I don't know if they did it on purpose, like having the voice of Green Goblin, the Spider-Man villain, as the voice of the ad, being like, am I a bad person? I've got the voice of a villain. I'm like, kind of, yeah. I think you're great. You're a guy who plays a lot of villains on the big screen, so kind of.
Yeah.
And for me, it just resonated so definitely. Yeah, please.
Yeah, sorry, I was just like, you're sharing so many insights that my brain is just layering off lots of ideas.
I'm happy.
This is very stimulating, the brain workout. So, we've spoken about high context, low context, high risk, low risk. There's another dimension, which is whether the culture is individualistic or collectivist.
Yes.
And that is super important in marketing as well, and in your messaging and in the way they search for things. So if you're trying to convey a message about climate change, right, how are you going to word it to appeal to the emotions or to trigger the emotions of an individualistic society? Well, you're probably safer approaching it from the connection between climate change and mental health, for example, because that's how it impacts people on an individual level. Whereas if you're talking to a collectivist society, maybe you want to talk about the social costs of global warming, and that might trigger their emotions of sadness or anger. So I think at the baseline, marketing is about encoding, a message to trigger an emotion, and the code that you use needs to be their cultural code. Because that's the code that they will be using to search for things. And it's in that search where SEO becomes relevant and they will find your content. But if you're not thinking like they are thinking and feeling like they are feeling, you're unlikely to connect with them. And that's where you need someone who is part of that culture to advise you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way people search from culture to culture. Funny, if it was something I touched on, I did an episode about Baidu and how different it is to Google and how similar in certain ways it is to Google, with Adam DeFrisco, who speaks the language, lived in China for years, had loads of really interesting insights from that perspective, in something I know very, very little about, having never lived in China and don't speak Mandarin or any Chinese dialects. And Adam was talking about the way Chinese users search on Baidu is so different to how people search on Google. And like you said, even if you directly translate it, it doesn't quite work and doesn't work in the same context. And like you said, you start with the cultural understanding, the cultural coding of how people use their language to search for stuff. And again, this is something Mark and I talked about a few weeks ago, about we've been using Google for, like I said, 20 years at this point now. I kind of know what I need to type into Google to kind of get the kind of results. I can tweak my query here and there and kind of understand what I need to do. But with the rise of things like Search GPT and Perplexity and all these like AI-powered things, there's a new way of searching. There's a far more conversational way of searching. And I know Google have literally just launched their Gemini side of things, and ChatGPT have the thing where you can ask it questions and kind of have this conversational, literally out loud with the voice on your phone kind of conversation. And for me, that so fundamentally changes how we interact with search engines. And I know there's a big separate topic about voice search and how it's going to take over the world, and it never really did, and all that kind of stuff. Everybody said, oh, we're going to have a Google Home or an Alexa in our house and you'll never use your computer again. Like, well, not quite. But I think the way search is moving to a almost more like casual conversational kind of side of things, I think makes this topic even more important and relevant than ever before.
Absolutely.
Because of how that informalities and the casual nature of conversation, that changes even more from language to language and culture to culture, right?
Absolutely. And I've seen linguists who are not properly trained in SEO suggest two very close variants of the same keyword as primary keywords for different pages. And, it's the same. Google is going to take this as exactly the same query. So you cannot be optimizing two different pages around the same one. And that's your linguist who's lacking SEO training. And also, I just want to make one little, just a note on what you said, which I agree 100% with. Yes, Google is becoming more about conversational searches and more informal, but not in every language because there's lack of data to train the models in lots of languages still. So in English, yes, 100%. In other majority language, Spanish as well, which is my native language, yes, to a large extent, that is also the case. But then in minority languages, AI and GPT and all these things just don't work. They do not work because they are not trained. They don't have enough data to train the models. So that also needs to be considered if you're going to make that part of your strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true, and talks about the kind of English language and Western centralization of so much of the technology we use in our everyday lives, whether it comes to the search engines or the LLMs and AI side of things. They're all built by a bunch of Americans in Silicon Valley who only speak English, and as a Brit, sometimes they barely speak English. There's some bad examples of English over there in America. And I find it fascinating. You're totally right, where I focus on English language SEO. I don't speak any other languages. I will know a couple of words, like I said, from my English language teaching days and in the school. I know a couple of words in most languages. I can say please and thank you and order food and very, very basic stuff like that. But I am nowhere near multilingual. But when it comes down to the way we search, you're totally right. Taking Japanese as an example. When I was learning Japanese before I traveled there for work, and I did 2 or 3 trips to Japan on my own, so I had to fully navigate Japan by myself in multiple cities, having business meetings in both Japanese and English and that kind of thing. I'm now very rusty. Unfortunately, I have not practiced in 6 or 7 years. I used to be much better, but I was able to aim for for Japanese, you have informal Japanese and very formal Japanese. And like you said, when it comes to that context of communication, I always learnt the formal Japanese just in case, because I'm there on a business meeting, I'm there under professional circumstances. I am more likely to offend somebody if I use the informal kind than I am if I use the formal and I feel a bit awkward. I would much rather be the awkward, very formal foreigner than being the overly informal and overly casual, which can be a big problem, especially in professional settings, when it comes to Japanese culture. So if you introduce yourself very informally to the CEO of a company, they could quite easily take offense to you, compared to being very formal. And even when I was having conversation with friends or people who were on the same sort of social hierarchy as me, I was still using the formal Japanese because I didn't really learn the informal side of things. They can still understand what you mean. They think you're being a bit weird and a bit awkward, but you're not likely to offend anybody. And for me, that was such an interesting thing to learn, where it's okay, I come from, again, being British, I tend to be very polite. We say please and sorry, maybe a bit too much in this country. I don't know if you can speak for that coming as a Spanish speaker, Maria. I know that changes as well, right? The way you say please, thank you, you're welcome, all that kind of stuff. That tiny little things like that can fundamentally change how people communicate. What we take for granted as British English speakers, saying please and thank you and sorry based at the end of every sentence, compared to how Americans speak English, compared to Spanish speakers, compared to German speakers, Japanese speakers, tiny little things like that can so fundamentally change the way we communicate, the way we market, all that kind of stuff. And that's not something you're going to get from translation. You Absolutely. Get the direct translation of I can say please and thank you in Spanish, but actually the way people actually say it to each other is not the direct translation of how that works.
Well, any good Spanish translator will know that if you're translating, I don't know, some content related to technology and there's an instruction to the user saying, please open this or that You don't translate the please into Spanish. You omit it. You omit it. Because
Exactly,
it would be so weird to have a por favor in the text, in a text of that kind. We probably say it twice a year. And I've been living in the UK. I'm talking about Latin American Spanish here, which is my field of expertise, my niche. But I'm pretty sure it's the same for European Spanish anyway. I've been living in the UK for 10 years, on and off. I have adopted please, thank you, cheers, and every other variation thereof.
Cheers is very British. That's when you know you're properly.
Well, I am saying each of them twice per sentence, and then I find myself visiting family and friends in Argentina and including it in Spanish into every sentence, and they look at me like I'm insane. Like, what is the problem with you? Can you talk normally? And I'm speaking Spanish, yeah, but you sound British in Spanish. Like, how are you? So yeah,
you almost have like a British accent to your native language. In a way.
I mean, I sound like my accent in Spanish is as local as it gets, like very thick Spanish Argentinian accent. But then I will be saying por favor and gracias so many times in every sentence that they're looking at me like I've gone nuts.
Yeah, I find that those little things so interesting. And I'm trying to think of the example. I can't remember what it was, but there was the way. Again, this is a generational thing, and again, something we've talked about on the show before. The way people search from even the same language and same culture, younger people search in different ways to. Me now being a 34-year-old, very old, apparently, internet user, which makes me feel very old, talking about, the people who have grown up natively on the internet. From the moment they're able to talk, they are using tablets and phones and iPads and interactivity when it comes to the internet, having a completely different perspective of their relationship to the internet and the way language works digitally and things like that, let alone how it works across cultures and across languages. For me, that was a really interesting thing where I think it was when you say, I'm sorry about something, you can say like, when you say thank you, you can say you're welcome, no problem, no worries, all that kind of stuff. And that changes so much from language to language, like Spanish being de nada, which means it's nothing, basically.
It's nothing, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if I said it's nothing in English, that would feel really weird. And I would typically say no problem, but you wouldn't say that in German or French or Spanish. And that would feel really weird. And tiny little things like that. And I've noticed it, like I said, back when I was working more multilingually in my language school days, there would be moments where I would try and directly translate what I meant to say, and then it would come out weirdly. And then, like you said, you would suddenly say gracias or por favor, and they'd be like, wait, what? Why are you saying that? We don't say it like that. Trust me, you're going to look weird or sound weird if you do that here. Don't be so British about it.
When I first went to the UK, I didn't. My English wasn't too good, and I hadn't learned the phrase likewise. When you say something nice to you, likewise. So I would translate it directly from Spanish, and it would or I would use what I'd been taught at English school in Argentina, and I would go like, "Oh, the same to you," and it sounded so awkward, and people were looking at me like, "That's not really what you say." So yeah, I can see what you mean, and I've been there myself.
Yeah, it's the tiny little things like that make all the difference when it comes to that localization moment, when it comes to really connecting with that audience and understanding how they communicate, where they're coming from, like you said, the emotional and the cultural coding behind all of it, where if I would say no worries in a different language, or saying to you as well, or likewise, anything like that, it seems so obvious to native speakers, and you just translate it and it's fine. I think that kind of wraps us up all the way around to how we started, like why this is so important to understand, because those little things can make a huge difference to how you are presenting your brand, your product, your services. Suddenly you can sound very informal when you're actually trying to be cool and casual and down with the kids and all that kind of stuff.
But it comes down to trust.
That as well,
absolutely.
Down to
trust. If you make them feel comfortable in the way you're phrasing things, you're connecting with them. You're connecting with them. You're eliciting the emotions that you want to elicit so that they will purchase. And between those emotions is that they trust you. You need to get them to trust you, and you can only get them to trust you if you communicate the way they're expecting you to.
Yeah, definitely. I think we talk about trust in the double EAT kind of way so often. I think about it very like rigid and regimented.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as you establish your experience, your expertise, your authoritativeness, and then you build together and get the trust. But you're totally right. It's an emotional thing. It's a human thing. It's a thing that is built into our cultures and our language and the way we communicate with each other, regardless of keywords, regardless of the digital marketing side of things. But then it is still so relevant to the way we communicate, the way we create content to rank well, to gain clicks, to sell products and services, all that kind of stuff. I think that is a really interesting way of looking at it. And hopefully, viewers, listeners out there, you now have a better understanding of why it is so important that SEO localization is a key part of multilingual side of things, and why that process needs to be thought through, and why multilingual, multi-skilled SEOs need to be involved in that process from the get-go, and everything like that as well. If the listeners and viewers do want to follow you, Maria, or do want to follow up with you or Crystal Translations, anything like that, where is the best place to find you?
LinkedIn. I'm very active there, so you can look me up by my name. Or resulttranslations.com. I will actually be publishing a blog post with the main ideas from this chat today. So if they want to have it all in writing, I'll be using the notes that I put together to transform it into a blog post. But LinkedIn is the best way.
Perfect. I'll put links for everything, including the blog post, including the main website and your LinkedIn in the show notes. So everybody go and follow Maria, go and follow what the guys are doing over at Crystal Translations, and stay tuned for the blog post because that'll be coming out very soon as well.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for joining me, Maria. It's been a real pleasure. It's been a really fun, like you said, very stimulating, interesting conversation.
I know, Maria, same here. Likewise.
There we go. And same to you as well. And that wraps us up this week for another episode of Search with Candour. Thank you so much for joining me wherever you are watching or listening. I hugely appreciate it. If you can like, subscribe, review us, all that good stuff that helps us promote the show, helps us grow, and all that kind of thing, I would hugely, hugely appreciate that. I have got some fantastic guests coming up in the next few weeks. I've got Noah Lerner, I've got Julia Panozzo, and I've got Darren Shaw coming up in the next few weeks, talking about a wide variety of topics. And if you're going to be in Brighton for Brighton SEO later this week, we're doing a live show. Once again, it's the 4th live show in a row. It's another collab with my good old pals, Sarah and Tasman from the SEO Mindset podcast. You can join us this Wednesday if you're watching this on Monday. It's on Wednesday, the 2nd of October. You can come and check us out and see us live. Come and say hello. And me and a lot of the Candelorian team will be at Brighton SEO the whole 2 days as well, through Thursday and Friday this week as well. So if you see us around, please do come and say hello. And yeah, doing a live podcast, come and join us. There's free pizza, there's free drinks, and we're talking all about how to do some strategic career planning without overwhelming yourself, which I think is a topic a lot of people need to talk about a little bit more, because career planning can be pretty stressful. So yeah, like I said, that's coming up later this week. That will be on the podcast feed if you are unable to attend. That'll be on the YouTube channel. That'll be on the audio feeds as well in a couple of weeks once I'm able to download the files and upload it and all that kind of stuff. So even if you're unable to attend in person in Brighton, you can still check out that episode in full. And like I said, some amazing guests coming up over the next few weeks as well. Of course, Mark and I will be back in the studio talking all the latest SEO news and recaps and all that good stuff as well. So plenty more amazing stuff coming up in the next few weeks and next few months as we head towards the end of the year, which is a weird thing to say. I feel like it was just halfway through the year and now we're towards the end of September. But yes, thank you so much once again for watching or listening wherever you are, and I will see you next week. Have a lovely week.